Shabbat Shalom. So I spoke about Joseph as the first diaspora Jew. Joseph actually has a lot of power, right? But his power is derivative and conditional, right? In other words, it comes from first Potiphar, right? And then from the king. It's not like he has power, in his own right. Okay, and this is something that, I mentioned how the bulk of Jewish history has actually been in diaspora, right? And it's not unheard of for Jews to have held power, but they held power because the king liked them, right? And if the king liked you, you had the power, and then the king woke up one morning and decided he didn't like you anymore, no more power, right? Whereas if you look, for example, at Montgomery County, right? Montgomery County, best estimates are that the population of Montgomery County is 10% Jewish, right? But a third of the county council is Jewish, right? And on top of that, the county executive is Jewish, right? I mean, he's not particularly observant Jew, but he's nevertheless a Jew, right? And 2 out of the 3 leading candidates to succeed him are also Jewish, right? So we have power in Montgomery County, sort of disproportional to our population, and it's power that's not derivative of some other person in authority who could wake up one morning and decide, I want you gone, right? And the last couple of years that I lived in Connecticut was the 3rd state in the history of this country to have 2 Jewish senators simultaneously, right? Anybody know what the other 2 were? New York never had 2 Jewish senators at the same time. California, right, with Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, and Wisconsin with Cole and Feinberg, who were senators at the same time. And then Connecticut was the 3rd when Connecticut had Joe Lieberman and Dick Blumenthal as senators for 2 years simultaneously. And when Blumenthal was running for the Senate, I heard whispers, oh, there'll be 2 Jewish senators, maybe that's not a great idea. Okay, now, who do you think I heard those whispers from? Other Jews, right? Other Jews. Not one time did I hear that from a non-Jewish person. In fact, if you pointed it out, they say, oh yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. No big deal. So you've got 2 Jewish senators, right? But Jews are thinking, well, they might vote for something that somebody doesn't like, and that'll cause it, right? So we know this story, right? But that's what citizenship is, right? Citizenship is when you have an equal role in the country on your own and not dependent on whether the person in power likes you, okay? And I realized a couple of minutes ago that I kind of did something dumb this morning, which is that, you know, when we have the blessing for the new month, I usually skip the prayer for the country and the prayer for Israel, which was dumb because now I have to go back because I want to talk about the prayer for the country, although I'm not going to read the whole thing. But, you know, you're familiar with it, right? And what it says, right? Bless all the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. May citizens of all races and creeds forge a common bond in true harmony to banish hatred and bigotry and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions that are the pride and glory of our country, right? I mean, God willing, right? But that's really the key. Now, I want to contrast this with the traditional prayer for the government, and this is from the Siddur edited by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs and published by Koren. And you know that I'm very fond of the thought of Rabbi Sachs, right? But here is his translation of the traditional prayer for the government. May he who gives salvation to kings and dominion to princes, that is to say God, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, who delivers his servant David from the evil sword, who makes a way in the sea, a path through the mighty waters, bless and protect, guard and help, exalt, magnify and uplift the president, vice president, and all officials of this land. May the supreme King of Kings in his mercy put into their hearts and the hearts of their counselors and officials to deal kindly with us and with all Israel. In their days and in ours, may Judah be saved and Israel dwell in safety. May the Redeemer come to Zion. May this be God's will, and let us say Amen. Okay, now, what is the difference between those two prayers? Yeah, Jacob.
Did it say exalt the leader of the country?
Yeah.
That's a difference.
What?
That's a difference, exalt the leader of the country.
Right. Right. Okay, so that's a difference, right? Yeah.
It expressly mentions the president and vice president.
It expressly mentions the president and the vice president, and I will tell you that, all right, so the prayer, for just a little, like, historical trivia, the prayer for country that we say is an edited updating of a prayer for the country written by Professor Levi Ginsburg of JTS about 100 years ago. And I mean, what I'm saying now is where the you know, they were putting out an explicitly conservative siddur, and they said this prayer is not appropriate for us. Why? Because
How we're comfortable people in this country.
right. The traditional prayer is a prayer of
Kings.
subjects.
Yeah.
Right? It is a prayer of subjects, and bless and exalt the king and make the king be nice to the Jews. Right? That's essentially what it says. Bless and exalt the king and may the king be nice to the Jews. Right? The prayer that we say, right? May citizens of all races and creeds forge a common bond in true harmony to banish hatred and bigotry and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions that are the pride and glory of our country. It is a prayer of citizens, not of subjects, right? It is a prayer of people who see themselves as part of the country, right? Not as ruled, right? And that is the key difference. Now, in terms of the specifics, the reason is I think that the original prayer written by Ginsburg did probably say I think that the president, the vice president, and then say like governors and so on and so forth. And the reason it doesn't say that now is very simple, because this prayer book is intended for use in the United States and Canada, right? And so, as written, right, it talks about our country, its leaders and advisors, right? The idea, I mean, a Canadian looks at this prayer and doesn't see anything inappropriate to the Canadian situation or the Canadian government, and if I am wrong, I am sure Rabbi Goldman can chime in from Canada and tell us that I'm wrong. But it's a very practical reason. They didn't want to have to print a US version and a Canadian version, so they rewrote it, to be less specific, right? But that, already 100 years ago, right, the editors, when they were putting together a conservative prayer book, they said this traditional prayer, it's not appropriate to people who are citizens. We are citizens and not subjects, right? And that is historically a new phenomenon, right? I mean, whatever you want to date it from 1776, I mean, you could date it really from 1776 or 1789, right? With the French Revolution, right? But the idea of Jews being citizens, right? So that's 235, maybe 250 years. In terms of Jewish history, that's nothing, right? I mean, we still talk about Kabbalat Shabbat as being a new addition to the Siddur, right? 500, 600 years, I mean, a little more than 500 years old, okay? So that's like nothing in Jewish time, right? But the classic rubric, the classic way Jews are taught to relate to the government is called dina de malchuta dina, right? The law of the land is the law, right? And I'll tell you what, I'll share this with you sometime next week, but the Rabbinical Assembly in the United Synagogue just yesterday published, and it's an ongoing updated web page with many, many resources about the immigration situation in our country and how we should relate to it and so on and so forth. And I'm proud to say I had a small hand in creating this resource. And at the top, it reminds us of dina de malchuta dina, right? That we have a legal, not illegal, obviously we have a legal obligation to follow the laws of the country. But classically, we also have a religious obligation to follow the laws of the country, right? But I want to make a couple of points. One is that this assumes that the government is something external to us, right? And let us assume, which I think is a good assumption, it's not 100% necessarily assumption, but a good assumption, right? Most of us and most American Jews, and indeed most Americans, feel that our government's actions and policies vis-a-vis immigration are fundamentally unjust. Right. Now, can we as Jews take refuge and say, well, it's terrible, but what can you do? That's what the Goyim are doing. No, we can't, right? Because who is the main architect of those policies? A young Jew by the name of Stephen Miller, right? So we can't, that's what the Goyim are doing, you know. No, we're involved. We're involved. So there are limitations, I think, to simply saying, well, that's what the Goyim are doing, what can you do about it, right? But there's also, I mean, even without that, dina de mahuta dina is not like across the board, right? For example, suppose the government passed a law that said, because this is a Christian country, everybody must eat ham on December 25th, right? Are you religiously obligated to follow that law? No. In fact, you're religiously obligated to not follow that law, right? The government cannot command you to do something that is against halakha, because, yeah, the government, but higher than the government is God, right? So the government tells you to do X, God says do Y, you do Y. Right now, however, okay, suppose the government banned circumcision, right? Would we be obligated to follow that law, or would we still be obligated to circumcise our sons at 8 days? Second, right? We would be obligated to still circumcise our son on day.
This is a stretch. I read somewhere, and I heard you also say in the past that we Jews follow the law of the land. That's a tough choice. I mean, in one respect you say it's no choice, but in another respect you're reacting not to the gentleman. Literally, you're rebuilding.
Right, look, I get that parents may say, I don't want to take that risk. I get that. I get that. I'm giving you a halachic answer. The halachic answer is God's law is higher than the law of the government. Okay? And this is not, I mean, there are countries in Europe that either have banned or are considering banning circumcision, right? And this, I mean, thank God there are Muslims, right? Because Muslims also circumcise. So Jews and Muslims have so far gotten together and defeated these laws, okay? But now, let's say, which has also happened in certain European countries, the government bans kosher slaughter. What do we do? Right? I mean, what do we do?
You either turn vegetarian, you import from someplace else.
Right, exactly. In other words, we do not have a religious right to conduct kosher slaughter when the government says no. Because why? Because we don't have an obligation to eat meat. We don't. Right? So if the government, because people start to think, well, and the government bans kosher slaughter, it's okay to eat non-kosher meat. No, it's not. right? Because you have no obligation to eat meat, right? So if the government bans kosher slaughter, we have an obligation to follow that and either be vegetarian or, if it's possible, to import kosher meat from another country, right? I mean, and if you go, for example, to Trader Joe's and you buy kosher beef, that comes from Canada, okay? But, you know, if they ban even the import of kosher meat, then you just have to be a vegetarian. Now, okay, let's say the government puts in an income tax of 80%, right? Which all of us would agree is crazy and unfair. Are we allowed to engage in tax evasion to avoid paying 80% income tax? No, right? Because the law of the land is the law. But they put in a law that says income tax is 40%, but for Jews, 80%. Right? Then we don't have to follow that. Right? In other words, we have to follow the law, even if it's unreasonable, as long as it's unreasonable for everyone. Right? Unless it commands you to violate halacha, right? Or, and if it's discriminatory against Jews. Right? Now, let me throw out the last one, because I'm going on, I know, but this could be a real possibility, okay? Somebody you know, right, is, right, somebody from El Salvador, who you know, who has temporary protective status. And if you have temporary protective status, there is no way to convert that into a green card or citizenship. Right? And then the government decides temporary protective status for people from El Salvador being revoked in 6 months. Right? And this is somebody you know. And they've been here 31 years. And they are afraid to go back to El Salvador. And so they come to you and they say, can I live in your house? So that the government won't find me and send me back to El Salvador. What does Judaism say about that? Right, do we still take dina to dina? Right, well, that's the law. Right. Or do we...
Care for the refugee.
What?
Care for the refugee.
Care for the refugee, right? Do we let that person live in our house in hopes that the government won't find it? Right? What do you do? Is that a violation of dina de malchuta? Maybe. Maybe. Is there a higher law even than dina de malchuta? I think there is, right? I mean, after all, the people who hit Anne Frank broke the law. The people who turned her in obeyed the law. Right? Yeah, Dave.
Trying to figure out the connection. Isn't there something about we were all once strangers in another nation?
Sure.
And therefore, law results in the very same situation.
Right. No, absolutely. Look, I know what I would do. Okay? I know what I would do, and I've discussed it with my wife, and we know what we would do. Right? But the particular person in question, the government, they say, well, he probably is at Rabbi Aaron's house, so let's go there and look for him. Right? So that might not be all that helpful. But
Aren't we Not everybody here will be aware of this, but it seems to me, some of us are in a similar situation when we tend to help us out.
Well, all right, so we found him a lawyer. And we paid for the lawyer, and he was able to renew his temporary status.
But because we did not ignore or turn away from that.
Right, but look, obviously it's not against the law to help somebody find a lawyer.
No, but what I'm saying is, the easy thing was to ignore it.
Right. Right.
Which we did.
No, we didn't, but you know what if that's not enough? Right? What if we find him a lawyer and despite our best efforts, he's still facing deportation, right? What do we do then? And what I'm saying is, think about this now, right? Because you don't want to make a decision on the spur of the moment, right? But this is real. This is real, and it could be anyway. Shabbat shalom. Thank you.